What is up, ladies and gents? Noli here. Welcome to another Payday video. We are roughly 3-4 hours into the release of the Gage Chivalry pack, and I've basically been trying out all the weapons on my own since they have come out. You guys know how I like to test new weapon DLCs. I basically go onto the armored transport heist, pay no attention to the objectives, and just use it as an enemy spawner just to see how strong the weapons are. This is always done on overkill difficulty to sort of standardize it. I also solo it with AI. I bring the AI along just in case I get downed unexpectedly. And that's about the only real use for them. Normally they're the ones busy getting down to cloakers. But it's normally a really good tell of the quality and the enjoyment you're going to have with the weapons. Now, this particular DLC, very much the same as every other weapon DLC, has brought 3 primaries along, 4 melees, a new throwable, which has been a trend recently that I really like, and the mass, of course. So I'm going to give you my first impressions of the weapons and where they're going to fit into the game, how enjoyable they are. The first thing I'm going to note is that they are all remarkably similar in style and what they do. They're all pretty high damage, much more high damage than we've seen from previous crossbows and longbows in the past. But they're all essentially slow fire rate. And another thing is that they all feel quite similar. To be honest, Overkill's done a really good job of making the designs unique. But you know, though the English longbow has a really cool draw animation, it doesn't feel like I'm really using a different weapon. If anything, it can be a little more awkward to use than the bow we already had within the game. That's not a massive complaint. One thing I would like to mention about this DLC is a lot of the weapons feel awkward, and they feel like they're meant to be awkward. They're meant to be a challenge, they're meant to be fun to use. I think I noticed that as soon as I picked up the first melee weapon, the big two-handed axe, and this thing is swinging as slow as anything. I'm like, well, we're going for a bit of a visceral chivalry feel, which is what the DLC, I suppose, should be all about. But the 3 main weapons, I'm going to be using them throughout. I do actually use the explosive rounds at one point, and we get onto that a little later, because I personally think that's how these weapons should be ran, especially the heavy crossbow and the longbow. Now, one thing definitely worth noting is that these on overkill difficulty have really nice damage numbers, and if you're hitting those headshots or hitting the body shots on most enemies, you're going to be one-shotting them. Even with the light crossbow, that's still, it's got 240 damage. That's really quite good. They all fit into crit builds, which is cool. I've always quite enjoyed them. They function in many ways like a sniper rifle. But where these weapons fall down and where I don't think they're particularly viable in their sort of natural standard state is that they don't have penetration. Heavy FBI SWATs are probably the biggest issue on overkill difficulty and on Death Wish. And they have armor protecting everywhere, really, but some soft spots, the head primarily. And though you can hit the head quite consistently up close and personal with these weapons, because they've got slow fire rate, if you miss the head, it's going to be a while before you can shoot again, and your damage is just going to be soaked up. And that's my biggest complaint, really, about all these sort of bow weapons, as well as the throwables like the shuriken, the card, or even the javelin we've got. For whatever reason, armored enemies just soak them up, and I'm not a massive fan of that. I'd like to see at least some element of penetration from the bows, especially the heavy crossbow. This thing is an absolute beast. Of all the weapons, the primary weapons added in the game, it is my favourite. It's got a really long reload animation, so it's got a crazy slow fire rate of I believe 20, which is really bad, but it's really good. It feels great to reload and to shoot, and I found just the most success both using explosive tip and just standard. It just felt easier to use for whatever reason. I can't tell you why. But as I said, on overkill difficulty and even on Death Wish, you're going to one-shot most enemies in the body. Problem is, no penetration, and that's where these weapons will always fall down, and it's why I don't think they'll ever be top tier. And as to a similar extent, if you're running them with your regular arrows, You can't really deal with groups very well. Again, fire rate is really bad. You miss a shot and it just feels like it takes forever before you have a chance to go again. And these weapons are hard to use. They really are precision weapons. You've got to get used to the drop. One thing I have noticed is I think the drop is a little lower on all of these. Obviously, the crossbows have very little drop, and the longbow feels like it fires just a little stronger and faster. Whether that's based on how long you charge it for, I don't know. You can fire a little faster than you sort of the visual animation shows that you can, but it's still a bit of a pain. So no, I don't think these weapons are particularly top tier. I do, though, believe when you put frag rounds on, they're really good utility and damage, actually, particularly the heavy crossbow. One of the biggest things you get when you're using these bows is you get reusable ammo. You know, you shoot a guy, if you run up to him, you pick up the arrow. And so if you're using two weapons like that in your primary and secondary slot, you drain absolutely no ammo packets, which is really good. It really helps your team out. And of course, you can still replenish your ammo with a ammo bag. But you get nothing from the floor drops. So that's cool. But if you use the frag rounds, you don't get any ammo back. Or I should say the explosive tip rounds. And That can be a problem. It means you have to run some sort of ammo bag within your team. But if you ask me, it's a small price to pay for making what is already a really high damage weapon, AoE. Giving it an area effect, it gives it much more viability against shields, particularly the heavy swats I was talking about. Doesn't matter, you can't penetrate, you just blow them straight up. Shooting into crowds, it feels great. It's really good utility against bulldozers. And tasers won't feel as difficult because you won't have to hit that meat shot. You just have to hit the floor nearby and you'll still get the kill. So frag rounds is definitely the way I would go, at least with the heavy crossbow and the English longbow. That's how I'd run those two, particularly the heavy crossbow. Really fun weapon to use, and it's probably the highlight for me in this DLC. However, they are not best in class. Well, they might be best in the special class. They're pretty good. But they're certainly not what you want for the perfect build. I remember talking about this a little bit with the samurai sword we got with Jiro. That is just the best melee weapon in class. It still is, even after this DLC. And if you want the best character, you're going to have to pick it up. With this, you don't have to. Totally optional. If you ask me, that's better. I don't really like the DLCs that are forced purchases. If you want to, keep your character as strong as possible and keep your gameplay as good as possible. But it just means that this DLC is more about the fun and the feeling and experience. Because these weapons do really have that medieval, oldie-timey feel to them. And they're fun to use, irrespective of whether they're strong or not. But like I said, with the explosive tip, you can actually do some serious damage with these weapons. So certainly not too bad at all. I was getting a bit frustrated when I was using them on their own. As is the case with many of these single-shot weapons, especially the ones with no penetration. But once you get the frag rounds on, it's a totally different experience. Let's move on over to the melee, because I do want to talk about these. I personally think this is one of the best sets of melee weapons we've ever got. I think they're all really unique, and I think they're really fun to use. And stylistically, 10 out of 10. They look great as well. Like I said, they're not as good as the samurai sword, but they do have pretty nice stats. I'm going to go from the bottom to the top here. The first one I used was the bearded axe. This thing has a really nice damage number. This is with the right skills. Pumping iron is the one you're really going to need to pick up. It does 135 damage at base, just a single swing. So you're going to one-shot the standard greens on overkill, which is awesome. Really good. But its swing time is painful. Its charge multiplier is pretty terrible. And while it's got really decent range, it's just not the best, I don't think. Feels great to swing, but it sometimes just feels a little frustrating that I can't chop through this crowd fast enough. But again, it's not a bad option. It's got a decent amount of concealment at 26. Not too good, but not too bad either. And if you're in a pinch and you just want to get rid of a single green swat in one swipe, decent weapon to pick up. I think it's one of the best for doing exactly that. Next up, let's talk about the great sword, the Claymore. This thing does 105 damage, the same as the samurai sword, but swings probably half as quickly. The real plus to this weapon is the crazy charge multiplier, particularly on knockdown. This thing does 58 knockdown as standard, fully charged over 4 seconds. It does 1013, which is cool. It's not a playstyle that I've ever really worked around. I always think charge is a secondary thing with melee. You really want to be able to get those quick strikes off to make use of the skills that we got recently with Infiltrator and Sociopath and things like that. So I wouldn't recommend the Greatsword personally, but no, it's got a multiplier damage-wise to 675, which is a one-shot to basically everything on overkill. And the knockdown, like I said, is ridiculous. More than you'd ever need. That's an instant knockdown, I imagine, on anything, no matter what. Let's talk about the Buckler's Shield, because I kind of like this weapon. It's got really short range, and you can feel it, and it feels awkward to hit with at times. But it's got great concealment. And it's got really good knockdown, 315 base. You just want to swing this as quickly as possible. It swings quite quickly, and its damage, actually, for such a high knockdown weapon is not bad, starting at 53 with a multiplier at 90. It's got a really short charge time, so you might actually be able to work that in. When you're hitting with this shield, you're basically going to have the enemy on the ground at all times. I think it's quite good, and I do quite like that playstyle. You know, if you've not got a build that particularly centers around doing damage with melee, it's great just to be able to swing this shield and knock down the immediate threat. Not my personal favorite. I'd rather kill than knock down, and for that, we use the Morning Star. It's got to be the best melee weapon, I would say, in this DLC, and it's reasonably standard. Its damage is 60 after pumping iron, which we've seen many a time before, and it's considering it's got a 4-second charge time, only hitting for 99 after the charge really is not good enough. So instead, you're going to want to focus on the knockdown and the fast swing speed with this weapon. It's really quite good for that particular purpose, and it melts through enemies and works really nicely in melee builds. So it's definitely up there, one of the best melees. Not as good as the Samurai Sword, but I've enjoyed using it. The swing speed is so fast, especially for such a big club. It feels great to use, and that's my personal recommendation if you pick up this DLC. Try out the Morning Star in particular, but they're all quite good, which is quite refreshing. Finally, as far as weapons are concerned, we just have the throwable. The brand new throwable we got is the Javelin. It's essentially a spear and works reasonably similarly to the Shuriken that we got in the Gage Ninja Pack. It has a headshot multiplier. It doesn't have a particular effect on it, but it does a lot more damage. You only have 3 of them, sadly, but they can, of course, all be picked up, and they're pretty easy to spot because they're rather large javelins. Now, this isn't a bad throwable by any stretch of the imagination. I did find use for it. I find it a little bit awkward to use, and the Shuriken's just generally easier. And I'd still say that the Molotov cocktail and even the explosive throwable options are probably better choices overall. But no, this does fit in its own little niche, which I like to see. It's got good utility for taking out cloakers in particular. There's an achievement that suggests exactly that, and you should definitely try it out. For that, if you don't have anything particular in your build to do so, just a quick javelin throw will do it. The problem is, though, the javelin throw never feels quick. The throwing animation feels slow, which means it's harder to aim, and despite it having a much bigger area of impact than the Shuriken does, I find myself missing more frequently with this. And of course, it's much bigger, so you can spot it and you can pick it up again, so the fact you only have 3 shouldn't be a massive issue. But no, I don't find it to be nearly as powerful as some of the other options, such as the Molotov cocktail. So definitely don't buy it just for this. It's fun to mess around with, but nothing too special. It can also be used to take out bulldozers. One thing I found, I'd shoot 2 shots with a heavy crossbow with the frag rounds, blow the helmet off the bulldozer, and then a single javelin, and he should be done. So as long as you're accurate with it, there is certainly some usage. And that's sort of a message that underlines this whole DLC. These are real high skill-based weapons. Obviously, you can put the frag rounds or the explosive tip rounds on and have a little more success, even if you're not as accurate. But if you have an amazing shot over distance with these pretty hard-to-use weapons, you will find this DLC to be a little more rewarding and helpful to you. One final thing to mention, the achievements. Nothing particularly special. I'm not that impressed by them. They're absolutely fine. You've got to do them to unlock the mass patterns and materials, so you've got to do them anyway. But yeah, that's definitely not anything too exciting or worthy of a mention. So that's it for the DLC's first impressions. It's not my favourite. It's not a bad one either. They did exactly what I thought they would. Sort of stylistically and visually, it's a great DLC. At least in my initial impressions. But it's not nearly as viable in terms of gameplay as a lot of the ones we've seen recently. So if that's what you're worried about, you might want to give this one a miss. Still a really good addition to the Payday, to your Payday inventories, but do be cautious with this purchase and think about exactly whether or not you're going to want to make any use out of these brand new weapons you get. So that's it. Of course, there's a sister update happening in Chivalry, guys. You get the awesome Payday-style masks. That's it for this video, and I hope I've been at least reasonably informative for those of you who are still sitting on the fence as far as a purchase of this DLC was concerned. Thanks again. See you all in the next one.